everyone, welcome to the next segment of our information series. This is topic number 8, focus on Indigenous homelessness. Today we are going to focus specifically on family Indigenous homelessness. My name is Cara Layer. I am communications lead here at INNformation, and I'm joined as always with Abe Brown, our executive director, and we have a special guest today. You want to introduce yourself?
Tapayusi Atika Tapisa Kilabuk. Hello, my name is Tapsa Kilabuk, and I'm the Indigenous Strategy Advisor and Community Liaison here at INNformation.
So we will jump right to it. Abe, I have a couple questions for you to start. So let's start with kind of our broadest question. Why is Indigenous homelessness unique from other types of homelessness?
Well, that's a great question, and I know that Tapisa will give us more insight into that. I think from my perspective as the executive director, and certainly when I talk with executive directors of nonprofits right across Canada, there's absolutely a growing awareness and realization of the fact that not only are Indigenous Canadians overrepresented in the homeless population significantly, and this is across all demographics, all age groups, and but secondly, the legacy of the colonization of Canada, and of course the impact on Indigenous communities right across this country, has left us with this group of folks who this land is their home, and it's of course if we want to use the term birthright, and yet they've been significantly disadvantaged. And so the challenge with Indigenous folks who find themselves homeless is you're not just dealing with the lack of a home. There's a disenfranchisement from their culture, often even from their language, from their community, from the place of their birth. And so, what we have to look at is how can we ultimately house Indigenous individuals and families in a way that aligns with their culture and supports them long term in terms of their overall journey.
Why do you think we see this overrepresentation? You touched on it a little bit, but do you have any distinct reasons as to why?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that there has been, when you look at, say, the legacy of things like the residential school system, where entire communities had children ripped from them, and then these children were put into, of course, the residential school system where their culture, their language, even their dignity as human beings was not in any way honored. When you take someone's culture, their language, their identity away, it's very difficult to see them thrive, right? And that's certainly not just Indigenous Canadians. You look at all over the world where Indigenous peoples have been essentially stripped of their land and their culture and their history, and that massive sense of identity loss and trying to find themselves again is a profound barrier.
So Indigenous homelessness has its own unique definition, and there is a unique strategy to better support Indigenous people experiencing homelessness. What is INNformation doing to adopt some of those into our work and the care that we provide?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, there's been several initiatives we've undertaken here. The first is, we wanted to start by making sure that if the people coming through our front door are Indigenous, and about 60% they self-identify to us as being Indigenous Canadians, we want to make sure that that component is represented in the people that serve them. What we're trying to do is look at everything we're doing through the lens of an Indigenous perspective, so that service delivery happens in a way that works for that population. And the other thing is, when we do deliver the services, it's not just an Indigenous lens, but how do we make sure that we have lots of allowance and resourcing for the program kind of delivery, things like smudging, making it much easier for Indigenous families who are experiencing homelessness to also be supported in their culture. And that's more complicated than it sounds, because we are guilty of thinking of Indigenous people as this large homogenous group, but actually in Canada, there's over 700 different nations, and many different languages and many different cultures and many different perspectives. And the more we can do our service delivery through those lenses and make those supports available, then we feel like we're certainly increasing their chances of getting out of homelessness and into what we all want, which is just, stability and independence.
Can you please explain the Indigenous program?
So on a daily basis, I come in and I check in with our family members that are Indigenous, and I just try to ask them like what type of support I can be for them for that day. Commonly, we just some practical things that they need help with is like ID clinics, getting referrals for tax clinics, as well as status cards. Those are the three very big and important things for our families so they can sustain housing.
Have you seen any positive changes by building those relationships?
I think it's definitely hard work to build relationships with some of our families because they are so guarded, and it's fair, especially with the traumatic event that they may have gone through throughout their life. So once they do feel as if they are in a safe space, they really do open up, and we have very deep, supportive conversations to get through their day. Intergenerational trauma is something that I focus on a daily. So because the impacts of colonization within Canada and over years, like historical, families feel as if they have been abandoned, not only by each other really, but by the government and by systemic discrimination and stereotypes. All of those things affect our day-to-day living in a way that is just, it's terrible. But to ease the impacts of intergenerational trauma, you really need to have that extra support for our families so that they don't feel ashamed or afraid to go to like an ID clinic or go get their status card or go to the dentist, like everyday things that people take advantage of.
What type of activities or different programs do you run for families so that they can reconnect with their culture?
A big one that I do maybe like it can happen 3 to 4 times a day, maybe just once a day, but we actually do a smudging ceremony. And what that's like is that we have a prayer, and it's very intimate. Like I feel so honored to be able to do that with our family members because we have this like moment of silence where we connect with each other into our spirituality that allows us to bring in positive thoughts and let out the negative thoughts.
Okay, so a question to both of you. Why is this important to the mission of In From the Cold?
It is very important to our mission at In From the Cold because we do see 62% of our families here that identify as being Indigenous. And so for families to sustain housing after shelter, we all would love to see the empowerment of our families so that they can sustain housing after shelter.
No, and that's such a great answer, Tappy, and thank you for that. I mean, at the end of the day, the entire mission and vision of In From the Cold, and I can say this from our board to myself right on through, is a community where no child or family is homeless. I don't know that if we end it in Calgary, that alone will solve it. And I think this is where the advocacy piece has to come into play. And by that, what I mean is a lot of these First Nations and the reserves across Canada have terrible living conditions, and we know the research, lacking clean drinking water, safe housing, certainly access to kind of education, and health care provision. And so a lot of the families are coming to urban centers like Calgary and Edmonton and, of course, the Vancouvers and Torontos. And so I think that family shelters in these cities are going to continue to experience these challenges. And so this is critical to us. We can't do our work without this because the drivers of that are way beyond our control. And by that, we're talking about these nations, First Nations right across the country where there has been such injustice for so long. And so, we're trying to do our part here, but we believe much more needs to happen.
How can people get involved or do more? If this is something they care about, what steps can they take to make change?
Well, I mean, I think that the thing that every Canadian can do, every single person watching this video here, can educate themselves better on the real history of Canada. So, rather than driving by somebody who might be homeless and might happen to be Indigenous on the street and sort of, get into that stereotypical kind of racist sort of thought process, I think it's time that we understand the history behind that, right? So we need to get more Indigenous awareness training, really look at the history of Canada. I think also that if you are supportive of a homeless shelter like us, In From the Cold, or any of the other great agencies in the city, then please financially help us and also advocate with government, because these programs do not pay for themselves, and unfortunately government does not fund us to do this, and so we have to essentially fundraise even to have somebody great like Tapisa on our team. And at the end of the day, I'm going to say we as Canada have a debt to pay here, and part of the way that we can do that is by educating ourselves, getting involved, and giving back.
And I really would have to just agree with Abe. Like, he really said it very well. Educating yourself and just having compassion and having an open mind, and just put the love out there.
And can I just sort of, I just want to, and I end this on a note of hope, and that is that these families, when they get engaged by our expert folks like Tappy and Samantha, the incredible result that we see at my level is that these families, they feel loved, they feel validated, they feel affirmed, and they actually get sustainably housed. And then they give that gift to their children, and that's what gets passed on. So I hope that if you're watching this, that you don't look at this and think, oh man, this is so complex, it's so discouraging. It's actually the most hopeful work that we do, and it's probably the most important work. And so please get behind this and see that we're helping to make brighter futures for the most important people, and that's the children. And so thank you for that.
Well, thank you both for being here today and sharing your knowledge. This will all be put on our website, on our social media channels, and look forward to our first ever information report being published in September. It is a longer report and more research based, so look forward to that. Thank you.